Hi, buddy. Today, I'm thrilled to talk to Faye Wu. Faye is a content creator. She has been consistently sharing her knowledge around how to build audiences, how to effectively create content across blogs, video, podcasts, and other mediums, and how to help companies use social media more effectively. And she's been doing this for many, many years. In the following chat, we cover everything from how she got started, how she made the transition from a stable job to becoming an entrepreneur, how she traveled the country with a film crew to record a series of documentaries with some very famous people, and a whole lot more. This is the fun one, so let's get started. Faye, it's great to meet with you. I've been following your content forever, so getting to chat with you right now is like, it's a lot of fun. It's like putting a face behind the words and the videos and the images that you often see. So it's great to be here. So before we get started, what's Faye's World? Who are you? And what makes you tick?
Oh, thank you so much. And before we get started, I just want to send so much gratitude towards your work since 20 years ago when I was a college student studying computer science and math. I had so many doubts. And when I stumbled upon Kurupa.com, I learned so much from you. I really couldn't believe you reached out to me. I barely get to say this to anybody who reach out for an interview. So I'm so thrilled. And thank you for asking. So Face World Media has taken many twists and turns. It has existed since 2014. First, as a podcast, just like you, I started reaching out to my colleagues at advertising agencies, marketing agencies. But since then, because of the podcast, I've left my full-time job officially as of January 1st, 2016, trying to save some money on my LLC setup. That's why. So trying to get every penny into the $500 incorporation money January 1st, and I started consulting for other local small businesses as a project manager, as a digital producer. But very quickly, I realized that content at its core is something that I wanted to be a pursuit of a lifetime. It wasn't something I wanted to do just for a year, for 3 years. So I was very, very, how do I say this? Ambitious about like, how do I do this so that I can do it forever? Like Dory Clark says, how to play the long game. So as evolved, and I will try to summarize so we can go into details if needed. But I did my documentary 2018, fast forward 2 years, and it gave me the break. It broke me away from the taking on high paying clients. I'm on the road. And then when I came back from the documentary, I have to build everything from the ground up. So that's when I really started working full time with creators and creative businesses. At the same time, I started my YouTube channel, which took off in 2020. Right in the pandemic. So nowadays, Phase World has evolved into tutorial sites, helpful sites for people and businesses looking to integrate artificial intelligence into their business, much beyond ChatGPT, by the way, looking at their processes, helping them do their business better, more efficiently. At the same time, I'm still a YouTuber creating tutorials. I still love talking to people like yourself, Karupa, still running my podcast. So in a nutshell, that's sort of what it is, content creation business as well as a consulting side to support what we do.
No, that's great. So let's go back to 2016. That's a long time ago in internet terms.
So
Today,
true.
everyone is a content creator. The tools, the services, the ecosystem is just great to be able to do this. So what made you decide to be a content creator, especially when back then it wasn't a very popular or common path?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks to the corporate life, which did not really meet the needs for me as a human being, I felt so much of it was missing. I was doing well. The paycheck was really good, was steady. I felt respected. It was doing well at work, but there was just this void and I couldn't quite describe it because nobody, taught me in school. My family members didn't quite point to exactly what was missing. So for me, Krupa was really about like, let's just start some conversations. What do I love doing? I love talking to people in this format. Back then it was more like bringing people to Chinatown. I'm originally from Beijing, China. I came here when I was a high school student. So many people at work wanted to say, hey, Faye, I really want to try dim sum. Could you take me there? And we then quickly sparked into this unbelievable conversation with anybody from IT, from copywriting, and I just thought, what if I could record these conversations? I'll just listen back to them myself when I feel, I don't know, sad or like dissatisfied. And I finally had the gut to launch the podcast. It was really scary for the first few episodes. I did not like how I sounded at all. And I was really surprised by how supportive people were. And I said, okay, let me just keep going then, whatever it took. And we can talk about the struggles. It was very much, I would say, not easy. There were a lot of negative self-talk at the beginning. And I just thought, you know what, like you said, I think at the beginning, before you even hit recording, if it could help 10 people, then I don't want to take that privilege away from people. What if I can develop a relationship? So just let that fuel me. And that's what I did. But to be quite honest, in 2016, I was not thinking about how do I turn that into a money machine right away? How do I get sponsors? And so I was still working as a freelancer for, different businesses. So money really wasn't an issue. I saw working for clients as a menu for me to drive revenue so I can do this work that I really love and know it's important.
Well, that's quite the story. So let's go even further back. I believe you majored
Okay.
in computer science and you got interested in computers. So how did you get involved in computers in the first place? Like, what was it that sparked your interest in that fun field, which I'm a huge fan of course?
Of course. I mean, you are definitely an inspiration. I remember stumbling upon your site sporadically, right when I graduated from high school around 2001. I didn't know what I wanted, but I just remember that transformation, the feeling, believe it or not, all the flash models and sites that you gave. Literally, I couldn't believe, I still can't believe we're sitting here having a conversation. So you played a really important part. And at the same time, to be quite honest, as an international student, I was someone who needed a work visa, who couldn't really work immediately after graduation. I was someone who had to be 17, 18 and start really seeing through my future years in advance. So, being a Chinese immigrant, talking to relatives, one of the reasons is not a good reason is how do I major in something that could probably guarantee or give me a good job when I'm a 22 and graduating. Computer science was really the field. And as a result, I think one thing that really made me quite happy was I had three different internships during college. I went to Northeastern, and it just kind of opened my eyes up to not just the theoretical computer science applications. We're learning Java at a time, and to be able to practice that and to see what it can do, it was satisfying. It definitely, again, had many struggles.
Yeah, it's an underrated skill sometimes to kind of
Mm.
pick an area that you think long term has viability as a career, which you can either make it your full time passion, or you can, I think it seems like what both you and I do as well, which is like, yes, it's a part of what we do, but then this is a
Mm.
jumping off point to do other more interesting things, and it gives a great foundation for being able to pull this off.
Yeah, very true. And actually, I like what you said about computer science almost as a social skill. There were a lot of hidden gems of learning computer science and thinking about all the practical applications, things, and terminologies I have to learn. And I think later on, even still today, as a creative entrepreneur, I really borrow and I apply a lot of things I've learned back in college I probably didn't appreciate back then to leverage in the work I do today.
That is so true. A lot of what I'm doing now, I always go back and go, if I only spent more time in college actually really understanding the importance of this, instead of just like cramming for the latest exam or the short term idea
Mhm.
behind it. And, if time machines ever become a reality, that might be one of those things where I go back and see, like, let me do this differently this time around.
Yeah, isn't it true though? I'm just curious, like lately I was listening to this like random episode of Tim Ferriss. I really hadn't listened to his podcast for a little while, but he mentioned the idea of our life actually come in seasons, where he was reflecting the same thing. When he was 20 years old, 30 years old, he wished he did this, but he didn't think he would be ready for them. So I think about the integration of our knowledge, our feelings, and our experiences in my 30s. And I just turned 40 very recently. And I think about being an entrepreneur pretty much throughout my 30s, and the things I was able to learn probably they weren't something that I could easily pick up when I was a teenager or in my early 20s. So in a way, like, okay, there's kind of no regret. And I've had fun along the way.
Yeah, one way I like to always think about it is like, imagine you're solving a maze. You're solving like a
Mm.
gigantic hedge maze, and you're trying to figure out like how do I get to places. There's these moments when you're actually stuck and you're trying to figure out where to go. a little bit of panic, a little bit of fear of the unknown, all these things kind of kick in, where it isn't until you fully finish the end-to-end maze, you're like, oh, wait a minute, it wasn't that bad. It turned
Mm,
out that it was okay. There were some paths I took that I didn't know if it worked out or not. And then you go back and go like, okay, it all turned out, fine. And then you remember, like, oh, there's a water fountain there. What was in the water fountain? Was there anything there? Right? Oh, I saw a sign there. What did that sign say? In hindsight, you look back at it. Now that you know that you're safe, everything is okay, you start reminiscing about like what if those options there. At that moment though, you don't have a guarantee. No one's going to be able to confidently say like it's okay, everything will be fine, just take a deep breath, relax, and make this work. It's never that sense. And even today I look at like how I'm approaching life right now. There are things that I'm like, oh, of course, 20 years ago I don't know why I was worried about that, like there's nothing there. But I look forward to 20 years from now, I'm like, I'm terrified of like how some of these things will play out. And so it just repeats itself. Like you're right, it's seasons, it repeats itself. I don't know how to overcome that fear though, because I'm no longer fearful of many things, but I'm
mm,
absolutely fearful of things in the future that I don't have any control over. It's one of the things where until you get there, you
mhm.
won't be like, yeah, it's irrational. Why are you afraid of it? But I guess that's what makes us human.
Yeah, I'm so curious, and I don't know if your guests ever ask you these questions, but I'm kind of curious. Like for the past 20 years, we obviously only connected now, but for me to look at someone like you, you clearly have very high IQ. There are things that came very natural, probably easily to you than most other folks. I mean, myself included, for sure, especially when it comes to computer science and programming, very intuitive. So I wonder, like in the past 20 years, did you find yourself having to reinvent yourself? Reaching new heights or making some parallel moves? Like, what are some of the things like related to what you just said that you experienced in recent years?
Yeah, first of all, I'll say I was a terrible computer science student, and the reason is basically I'm a visual learner. I need to be able to
Mm,
visualize what I'm learning and see the actual meaning behind it. Because for me, the bar for is it a good use of my time or not, I was spoiled, And so for
mm,
me, like taking classes, and even though there were great teachers, great classes, like nothing I can actually complain about, I
mm,
just found it all to be meaningless. I'm like, I know that this is not going to be important. Why am I learning this? And no one was actually explaining it in a really good way. And the reason I bring it up is also like I'm writing a book right now on data structures and algorithms. And the reason for that is because that was one of the classes I did absolutely the worst in back in college. And I was never a software engineer. I'm a product manager. So I basically, have to understand at a high level, like how these
mm,
things go, but I don't deal with technical details at all in any way, shape or form. But I
mm,
still do enjoy writing and teaching people various technical concepts. And so that gave me a perspective like, okay, 20 years ago, if I had a book like what I'm doing right now, how would that actually help me make sense
mm,
of like this topic and see the meaningfulness of it? And there's so many examples when I go back in my life of like, why am I doing this? Why is this completely, why did I hate it at that time? Now I see the value of it. And that keeps coming back as the main theme in like what I do here, because I wasn't very good at computer science. And I always knew that I enjoyed working in a real company, like doing some of these things. So this is like a
mm,
side project, like what I'm doing right now, like with like my blogging and my podcasting and so on. It's just a thing like on the side, like I'm doing it like in a parallel to it. But what I realized is that what I really enjoy is
mm,
just solving problems and talking to people and doing these things in a very abstract scale. And I love large companies mostly because it takes a certain kind of skill to survive in a large company. The politics, the inertia, and all these. And I'm like, I
mhm,
enjoy it, and so that is the thing that I use to like. How can I use my learnings here to indirectly feed back into my hobby? So what I really created is I like to call it a career reinforcing hobby. So it
mhm,
started off my blogging and thing was the primary thing I did, and I had like a job on the side. Over a period of time, I realized like I actually really enjoy my job more. I really enjoy the people I meet with, the challenges I see, and so on. Then I just flipped the equation around. So it became a career reinforcing hobby. It's what I do right now, as opposed to a hobby reinforcing career. And
mm,
the things I do and all of that, purely accidental. I never actually planned it out. It's mostly a case of like, am I enjoying this? Do I find this meaningful? And can I use what I'm doing right now to help me be better at my job itself? And so
mhm,
one of the big things about podcasting that I really enjoy is I used to have to spend a lot of time like on the fly, understanding the situation, making presentations, talking to people, customers, execs, and so on. And to me, podcasting became a natural extension of that, where I'm just channeling my own curiosity and trying to figure out how to communicate ideas and
mhm,
get information from others in a very effective way as well. And
mhm.
so that's really been the driving force in a lot of what I've done.
It's so refreshing to hear that because I realized we kind of lost in touch, even though we're never really in touch. But I felt very close to you because of the work you have created, 20 years ago. And to hear so much more about your current journey, it's just so satisfying for me to realize, like, number one, how relatable you are. And what is precisely what you said about computer science. I was really bad at programming on paper. I remember going through midterms and finals having to program on paper. And I also argued a lot of these professors did not really explain the problems very well, or certainly did not make them interesting. And it was a struggle that I never thought you would be going through. And it's so satisfying to hear that, channeling our curiosity without, and also the unintentional, unplanned path is something I hope we'll get into as well. Is that I also did not anticipate that, okay, I want to start a podcast. And it makes me smile to see people wanted to have at least 10 episodes in the bag. They want to know everything. They want to have some sponsors already lined up. And then you see that still on average, most podcasts will stop after the seventh episode. And for me, it was like, I didn't have these expectations. I would sometimes release 2 episodes a week. Sometimes I would take a break for 2 weeks. I didn't think anybody would care, but that actually helped me create content very consistently, which I know is a theme that you're also interested in as well.
Yeah, and we talked about this before we hit record.
Mm-hmm.
It's the motivation behind why we do the things that we do. If your
Mm-hmm.
motivation for creating a podcast is so that you can get a million visitors, and then like you can get the big sponsorships and things like that, some people are lucky and they hit it out of the park from day one. But 99% of people, it takes time. It takes a certain commitment. Being able to go through this gigantic trench of no one watching your content, no one watching what's going on, and things like that. And so you need something bigger to motivate you. Why do you do the things? So you need a stronger purpose of like what makes this work. And I think that's the hard part that many people often don't realize is that, survivorship bias is huge, especially in a world of social media and algorithms and so on, where
Mm-hmm.
not only is survivorship, bias there, it amplifies it at an almost like unrealistic scale where all you see are people basically talking about how like I woke up one morning and hit publish and now I'm like the spokesperson for A, B, and C, and you start and keep seeing that over and over again. You start internalizing that, being like, wait, there's something wrong with me here. This
Yeah.
way we're going back to college again, right? If
Mm-hmm.
every student was struggling and having difficulty, I'm absolutely certain the professor, the curriculum, they would be like, wait, let's take a step back, let's revisit this. I was an outlier. All my peers did fantastic. Like they had no difficulty like looking at this like gigantic wall of text and diagrams and be like, oh yeah, this makes sense. I'm making connections. I can do this
Oh.
homework and all these things. I'm sitting there going like, what is this? What am I looking at here? I'm trying to sort some numbers, yet I see these mathematical equations. I watch like just over and over again, doesn't click. And so I'm like, wait, there's something wrong with me here. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you get to that point, you're like, okay, I can either give up or I can adapt and realize, okay, how do I tweak this situation to be something that I can get past and figure out how to do things more meaningfully, beyond that. And those are all the hard parts that I think that may have been easier for us back then in a world where we didn't have like the massive amount of social media and the amount of pressure we see from like what does success look like. What is the first 10 minutes of a video supposed to do? What's the first hour of video supposed to do? Mr. Beast talks about like, yeah, here's how I pick my topics and so on. I'm like, I don't do any of that. Maybe
Yeah.
I should, but it feels unnatural. And the
Yeah.
guy going back to like what motivates me, if I'm not enjoying it, if I don't think I'm learning something from it,
Mm.
then that's okay. I'm not going to do that, even if it means that I greatly, reduce the amplification of the content I create or the people I reach. It's fine because at the end of the day, no one escapes the world alive. So I'm like, let me just we have a limited amount of time on Earth. Let's just do what makes us happy and makes us fun, and provide for the people around us, and just be a positive member of society. Everything else, whatever happens, it happens or it doesn't. But that's the intrinsic motivation part again. It's like you have to focus on what are you going to get out of the learning part of it.
I think fun and happiness are so essential for anyone, and especially for creators, because we're having a good time chatting, and people should visit your podcast and your YouTube channel. Nearly 20,000 subscribers and a lot of conversations. They can see the smile on your face, and even if they can't see you, some people will listen to the podcast, and I also focus on actually a project on disability. So I think about people with different abilities can still experience you, even just through hearing your voices, right? They can sense that. And I've spoken with creators believe it or not, who are extremely successful. I've spoken with, women. There's one woman comes to mind who started this sort of, like a sort of like a food blog. She says she's not into food, and her blog generates $500,000 on, just one blog. And she was really not having a lot of fun. She was telling me she was thinking about quitting. And I was thinking, like, what a privilege to be in, to have like a steady income, and that is, a lot of people would be like a dream. That would be a dream come true. But for her, she said she wished she picked a different niche, and she's thinking about how to start over again. So I think that's absolutely true about connecting with the work that we're doing, as opposed to only doing it for the money.
Yeah, I completely agree on that. That completely makes sense. So, as an aside, one thing I've noticed in Riverside, right? It
Yeah.
shows up both of us as guests.
Oh,
Do you see
it
an
does.
upload sign on your side where it says uploading?
Oh yeah, I can see. I can see recording uploaded 99% for me, and
Okay,
I can
perfect. Then
see.
it's working.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Oh yeah, yeah. They're pretty solid. Believe it or not, I was like one of the first creators to do a do a actually branded video for them. This like 2 years ago, before they became so famous. My God.
Yeah, I went through so many podcasting solutions, from
Mhm.
like Zoom to Google Meet to ultimately Riverside because of what they do here. And I'm
Mhm.
going to cut this part out, by the way. This is all part of like the show. Like people are going to be like, "Wait, what are they talking about?" I'm like, "Yeah, this
Uh,
is this is us doing it live. Like this is the life of a content creator. Where like in the middle, you have this moment of panic, going like, wait a minute, I only see one icon. This is me with guests. I don't see because I used to see both you and me like showing up in like the
I see
list
it
right
here.
side.
There's a drop down. Do you see the drop down? Like
I
you and
do
one
see it.
other? Yeah. So I can
Yeah.
see you and me. Both, yeah, both says guests, but I think that's okay. I can see uploading, consistency. Um, yeah. And I know to
Yeah.
keep this tab open when I'm done as well.
Yeah, no, all right. We'll figure it out one way or the other, Faye. So,
No worries at all.
yep. So, getting back to your first days of creating content, how was it? You mentioned earlier that it's never easy to start
Mm.
off creating content. How was it? What motivated you to keep going?
Absolutely. I have three, at least three different scenarios. I just want to call it out. Like first day recording my podcast, which was audio only. The recording part was really fun, but my goodness, the editing and hitting the publish button process were extremely painful. I felt it in my chest, in my gut, to be like, well, I shouldn't be doing this. I sound too funny. I'm not a reporter. I am not a radio host. Who gave me the permission to do this, right? And so we can delve into that. Guess what? Well, a few years later, you would think that I was really quite comfortable with podcasting, believe it or not. A few years later, my producer Herman said, "Faye, we should do a docu series. We should invite the most famous people." Like we just had this plan, so we ended up having Seth Godin, Chris Voss, Sarah Cooper, Atherton twins from Cirque du Soleil. We had all these folks to join me, and Dory Clark as well. And I just remember I was on the road. I had very limited clothing choices, and I was with the production team. Was working with for the first time. Oh my goodness, I relive that all over again. I was like, oh, like people are like, on camera, you put on 20 pounds. I was like, oh my God, I look horrible. And then I would say another year later, after that, I wanted to be on YouTube. And once again, I was nervous. But then I look at myself now on YouTube compared to the first video. I'm like two different people, and keep in mind I've been an adult this whole time, right? So yes, it doesn't. I feel like it's not just once and done. It comes in waves and ebbs and flows, and it's kind of exciting to know that you're growing, even 18 plus.
That's great to hear. And so you mentioned that you're evolving as a content creator and all of this. How much of it is your own personality itself? Like a lot of people have like their
Mm.
on-screen persona, then they have their off-screen persona. Do you have that same kind of thing, or is it just Faye all the time?
I think that's such a great question. I've been thinking about it and thinking about my answer for that. My persona has been pretty consistent for a couple of reasons because primarily my content on artificial intelligence tutorials. I did a lot of Zoom videos, like virtual meetings. So it was frankly be kind of easy for me to be myself versus we were just talking about Sarah Cooper a moment ago. Obviously, she has different personalities because she is a comedian. And so I'm pretty consistent. But when it comes to me versus authentically me, I think when we create content, we do really dial up the energy by at least 10 to 20%. So as soon as I'm done with this recording, I'm sure I'm going to talk to my partner, my mom, slightly differently, right? I'm probably going to be way more chill. Same thing with my YouTube video that I try to perk up a little bit so that I deliver that energy to whoever is watching. So I guess I'm 10 to 20% not exactly myself right now.
Yeah, that's 10-20% actually great. So it's not like a method actor who's like 100% different on screen versus
Yeah.
like when they're off the camera recording stops.
Yeah,
So
very
your
true.
documentary, it's actually really fascinating because many content creators typically it's just like it's a solo show. Like they basically do these things on their own. They make all these things work. How do you find the crew? How do you find the people? What are logistics even of like going from location to location with like a bunch of people and making this work?
Yeah, it was so fascinating. I was figuring it out with my producer pretty much for the first time that they also were doing a documentary for the first time, except that they were all professional video editors. They would go shoot something for like half a day, maybe a couple of days, but not a documentary on the road for 3 weeks plus two more towards the end. So it was so fascinating. Me as a product manager and also a project manager coming from those years of experience really helped me with spreadsheet, with planning, with budgeting, and also communication skills. Frankly, like what we had one member at the time was gluten free, traveling, and how do we really arrange for all of that. And I'm also like happy to talk about how I got a little bit of the funding. It was partially funded by myself as well, about like 60 40 coming from a sponsor. And so we made it happen. I think exactly like what we're talking about. Like you, even as a professional filmmaker, you would never know all the pieces or have all the answers. So we basically try to figure it out as we came along, and literally in moments where we were traveling and I was still emailing a guest to say, is it possible for us to interview you? If he were to say yes, then I have to drag and travel with the entire production team all the way to San Francisco and then back to LA. Then we fly all together to New York. Live in Boston. So the travel logistics are so crazy as a result. I wrote a series of like documentary how to 101 for people who want to do this for the first time, published on my blog. And I was getting like a lot of questions. It was really fascinating.
Because it's almost like inside baseball for a lot of
Mhm.
people. The audience of people who probably are interested in like how do you go from point A to point B with on a location with the set and a crew and so on. It's a small audience, but that's the kind of information that nobody ever gets to know what the answer is unless they actually live through it. And I think
Yeah.
that's actually fascinating. And I actually watched some of those, and that I was related to. I'm like, this is so fun because even though it's like I have no plans of doing that, anytime soon, but
Yeah.
just seeing because it's new, it's novel, it's something that no one else has really talked about. I can see like the 80th video on the same topic, or I can watch your video on this topic and be like, wow, like I have no idea what goes on here. You always see bits and pieces of it. I mean, you watch like behind the scenes documentaries of like bands and music shows and comedians and things like that, but it's always very different because I can't really relate to like how U2 or Taylor Swift travel. Like, yeah, that's a whole different league of its own. Or even like comedians. It's like it's a very different world in terms of it. But a content creator, like I can relate to this because I can sort of relate like what all goes into like hitting a record button and like picking a topic and people. Like this is fun, this is entertaining and also informational at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. It's so crazy. I think people, first of all, I develop such respect for people who do this for a living because for us, it was kind of a temporary thing. And to figure it all out, like you said, we try to capture as much behind the scenes footage as possible. I mean, I wish we could do more. I wish we had another cameraman, which is follow me around because there were so many funny moments. There's no way for me to forget. For instance, we, on location, we have to either rent a studio, which were totally out of our budget, or the timing, some of those just won't work out. So we ended up booking a ton of Airbnbs as, film locations. And there was one that the woman was super nice, but there was just no way that would have worked. So I remember on site, I had to call her. We became really good friends. And I found out that this is a woman who started her own organization for domestic abuse for women and children. I ended up interviewing her. She fully refunded me for the Airbnb, and even was calling me to say, Faye, can I help you booking a local hotel? You just don't know the relationships, the friendships you're going to be developing. Fast forward, we ended up booking a hotel. It was Marriott. And we had to set up all the film equipment. And guess what? Nobody could stay in that room. You pay $300, and now you got to find a different Airbnb to live in. And because everything is already on site. And that, by the way, was for Seth Godin, which I absolutely admired, discovered him at the exact same time that I found out about you, Karupa. And I just remember walking Seth Godin. My heart was just pounding out of my chest. He was there early. I walked with him towards the room. It's room 104. And I just remember the look of the hotel as if I was going to kidnap him or something, like something bad. And then he opened it up with just all the film equipment, fill up the room. And he's like, it's okay. This is how professionals do it. And I was like, oh, we're going to be okay. And then you have 40 minutes to do everything. When you book with these guests, right? Like it's 40 minutes. You have to show up 2-3 hours ahead of time, and they show up and they leave. If you don't have the footage you captured, well, that's it. You just lost a whole day of money with audio engineers, with everybody. So, I think for me, the last thing I will say is, when I was facing those moments, I know that they were literally completely out of my control, that I could be sick, the guests could be sick, they could cancel. I still have to pay the audio engineer. And I actually ended up feeling a lot more relaxed. I just go, so be it. If I lose $5,000 today, that's fine. I need to be mentally okay with it. So it's crazy. You learn so
And
much.
you're richer for the experience as well. I think like a lot of people say, right,
Mhm.
the way to measure a life well lived is how many interesting stories you can ultimately come up with on things that happened. And so to me, like all these things are like whatever happens, it's a good story. It's something that you can tell people about decades from now, and it's still going to be as interesting, as relevant as it was for you the moment you were actually there.
Yeah, you're right. I love it.
Sure. So, getting back to the audience, for example, right? One of the biggest challenges of being a content creator, especially when you're starting out, is how do you find the first couple of people who are like, oh, I like this content, and then the first 100, first 1,000, first 10,000, and so on. So, how did you pick your first audience, or how did they find you? How did they choose you?
Yeah, such a great question. At the beginning, I really had no idea. And I think for a lot of content creators, relying our family and friends, they're obviously very supportive, very lovely. They're not enough. And they can be short lived because, I look at the creative entrepreneurship content I create now, frankly, they're probably not quite right for my family and my friends. And going beyond that, what I have learned is to try to find out kind of that pyramid ikigai, or kind of find that three circles of knowing, what you're good at, what you want to do, and the values that other people are seeking for. Like, what can you teach others that is something that they actually need, as opposed to something that's in your head. So going back to, what you've always taught us is to experiment, treating a lot of things that we do in this life as experiments, as opposed to set in stone that has to work. For me, the transformative experiences are, I would just name two, and we can talk about like maybe one, or both in particular, that your audience might be interested in learning more about. See what I did there? One is my YouTube journey, really transformative, because given how much work, money we put into the documentary, like I could only market so much. I put it on Amazon Prime, but then what Amazon Prime would do, just like any big platforms, after about 2 years or so, you have to compete with the other films. And now it's something you have to pay as opposed to free with Prime. And we didn't really make a lot of money from the documentary, but it was a really good social proof. Now, building an audience is something entirely different. I think when I finally started my YouTube channel in 2019, no plan. And the one moment that I realized was the pandemic happened. We were all doing Zumba dance. I want to give something really like a specific example. I'm into technology. What I was thinking, Krupa, I was like, man, I have to dance at home. I need to help all my not very technical Zoom the instructors to get online. And teaching on Zoom was really impossible because of the syncing issue between, movements, music, and sound. And I figured out a hack. I did a very, frankly, crappy video. I edited probably in 10 minutes, put it online when my channel had 300 subscribers. And I remember waking up the next day, it was 1,000 views. It was something I never saw before. And then the next day was 2,000. Then it was 5,000. My channel was monetized within a month. So from there, with all the comments, right, that was considered a takeoff video. From there, I was able to create a lot more tech tutorials for Zoom, then branch out to Google virtual events. Then companies start really discovering me. That's how I build an audience there. YouTube is not perfect. I'm a YouTube strategist. I can definitely break that down for people if they're interested. Another new venue that we started off is it's SEO based. So we're trying to, knowing that the internet and Google, all that, everything is different now. We know that 25% of the content discovered every year is net new, is brand new. So how can we create content that fill a certain niche and build the kind of bridge the gap within that niche? So that's kind of how we build our audience little by little, and to engage, to reply to comments. It certainly work.
No, that's actually, the essentially what you're saying is it's not easy. It takes work. It's a conscious choice to, pick an audience, nurture them, grow them, and make this all work.
And then you can lose them too. Exactly. Like
Exactly.
you can, once you pivot, like for us being on YouTube even for 4 years, our content has really changed and shifted. We've done brand deals, sponsorships. People might leave. The previously Zumba instructors probably won't find as much value in the content I create now. So I think to know that they may come and go, and how do you communicate that? You have to know what you want. So I think it's definitely an art, and takes a lot of perseverance, and it takes a lot of practice.
I actually want to talk about exactly that. So, kind of nice segue here, because you talked about ikigai and the balance and all of these things. Is that we evolve as human beings, as people. What you might have enjoyed talking about and doing like 7, 8 years ago, very different than what you might be interested in right now. Very different what you might be interested in, let's say, in the future as well. And like you mentioned, audiences like you for a certain type of content, and that's what they start following you for. They may not be ready for the journey of you evolving into someone new. So that's why the churn often happens. How do you balance that? And I'll give you a personal example.
Please.
What I used to do is talk about animation and like making things move and all these fun things. But then my interest evolved. My change. I started enjoying more of the more technical side of like, why do things work the way they do? Why do big systems work the way they do? How do databases work? How does AI work? More the behind the scenes details. And I knew by doing that, I've alienated everybody that I've basically built up an audience for a very long time. And and I saw the numbers. I saw all that going in a different direction. I'm like, that's okay though, because the whole ikigai part of it. If I'm not going to be happy doing this, I can't imagine like I'd be writing the kind of content or creating kind of content that makes me really excited.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, I deliberately don't talk about half the things that I actually really want to talk about, because 90% of my time these days is thinking about product management, product leadership, how do you navigate corporate politics. That's what I enjoy. I mentor people around that stuff. So I no longer spend any time actually actively teaching about programming and development, but I do artificially force myself to do that because talking about something completely non-technical would be too much of a whiplash for the audience. Like, if I already like
Mm-hmm.
churned 90% of my audience from like 10, 15 years ago, I'm going to churn everybody by the time I talk about this. So I artificially control myself and say on LinkedIn, I'm going to try to talk about these kind of things, even though that's what I really care about. But on everything else, I got to continue the image that I built up, falsely or not, of being this tech person that's visually creative, interesting things, even though none of my day job, I spend 0% of my time these days thinking about how do you make this animation work? How can you fake 3D in a 2D world? The things that I was really passionate about, like back then, I'm not as passionate about right now. I enjoy it. I enjoy consuming other people's content, but to be a content creator, that you gotta like internalize the pain that someone's feeling, especially when trying to teach people something and go there. I don't do that anymore. And so I often do struggle, like, some of the fears, for example, I have is like, how long can I sustain basically doing something that people have known me for a long time when I'm no longer happy doing that? And so turning back to you, how would you balance something like that? Because you've also evolved in your content greatly from that
I
time?
so oh, thank you so much for the question. I so appreciate you bringing that up because clearly you're not alone. I'm not alone in that at all, right? And I think number one, you said internalize that pain. There is certain level of pain associated with it, but also as you're saying that, I feel like I was smiling because it feels like it's literally like there's like a mother and child or a parent child relationship that you were born this baby and you learn to crawl, to walk, you go to school, then you go to college, you start your own life. And throughout that, I'm not sure if you realize that too, that we've also developed these frictions with our parents. Obviously there's a lot of joy, but there's also a lot of pain that we no longer function like a child who's like needing them all the time. I feel like my mom's still struggling with that sometimes as close as the last night. I'm like, did she say something to me? Did she really intend to say that? But I think it's important for us to be creators and to realize that we have to. There's not a choice, that we have to evolve and change. One of the things that really helped me was, I believe, Freddie Mercury from Queen said that, especially, they were operating at the time, I mean, the world's top tier level. He said that he was smoking, drinking. He's like, he said, I even wrote an article about this. I discovered in an interview. He's like, you go on stage, everybody's like Bohemian Rhapsody. Like everybody wants to hear those three hit songs. That's what everybody's there for. And all of a sudden, he's like, I have this solo, I have this really mellow tune that I've been practicing. And his fans were like, what are you doing? We don't want that. And he sat there and said, as a creator, you have to know who you are. You have to know what you want. Because if you keep creating the same things, and that audience eventually probably will leave anyway. So who you are now, what are you left with? So I think that's basically what I think about, that's a story, that's something that really happened, and he's someone I do look up to. So to remember that, and it's really hard sometimes because we want the views. So also, like, I want to mention something really practical. It's not just something that's in our head. I have brands reach out to me. Okay, we're okay with the negotiation, this is how much we'll pay for sponsor content. And they will go, Faye, I was just looking at your last few videos on YouTube. I realized that when you're not talking about AI and things like that, your views are low on certain videos, things like that. And how do you respond to that? And my take it is like, don't work with me. I am not someone who's going to spend, YouTube advertising dollars just to please your eyes or just to fake the data. When you, look at certain channels where the number's so consistent and people are like, oh, you're so consistent with content creation. Well, I can tell you how to do that exactly with $50, right? So I just refuse to kind of go down that path. For me, I think one thing, Krupa, I don't know if you have when I say a team, if you have someone you love and trust who can be there for you, is I find myself not just in any creator community, but I find myself in a very small group of creators who have been growing up with me, who live with the same pains. We're here to support one another, to reassure that this is the way. Obstacle is the way, right? So yeah, that's kind of day by day. That's how I continue to be a creator.
That makes a lot of sense, and it totally resonates. Now, here's the other angle to it. You bring up Freddie Mercury, bring up the music part is an interesting angle because, we talked right now about how we evolved, how we
Mm,
changed, and, will our audience kind of grow with us. There's also the flip
mm,
side of it. The world moves on, the world
mhm.
evolves, and we
Yeah,
just cannot keep up anymore. Like,
yeah.
independent, Flash was probably the big thing that you and I, connected on like long, long time ago. And of course,
Mm,
technical reasons, business reasons, Flash is no longer around. So the
mhm,
world we have had to, at least those of us who were doing things in Flash,
mm.
had to adapt to newer technologies, web-based, even though they weren't ready, and all these things. So the struggle of like, how do you make something work when the actual tooling and things aren't really there?
That's so true.
Same with music as well. What might
Mhm,
have been very popular and like what people enjoyed listening to in the 70s and 80s, very
mhm,
much not something that you see here. You can probably count on one hand the number of bands that were able to reinvent themselves over the decades to still be relevant in some form or fashion even today, but it's a very small number. The survivorship bias and the percentage, the power law, all these things fully apply here. We're like, yeah, there's probably five that we can probably think about, Rolling Stones, and
yeah,
examples of that. But everyone else is like tied to the decade or the era that they were pretty much known in. I think it's very true
exactly.
for content creators as well.
Mhm,
There are moments where like these content creators were like extremely relevant because they hit the
mhm,
zeitgeist. of the moment that they were currently in. But then the world moved on, the interests moved on, tastes moved on, demographics shifted greatly as well. Back when you and I were creating content, there are probably maybe 2 billion people on the internet, and they were probably all mostly in, very developed Western parts of the world. They all spoke English. Now, 6 billion, 5 billion people on the internet right now. And I can't imagine a world where what worked for a small audience will scale now, because the persuasions and interests of this much larger audience very, very different. And many content creators, and I'm going to say me included, have difficulty understanding that world, understanding scaling to that new audience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you brought up this point because we literally very recently started using Weglot, Weglot, to translate not one website, one site we're running, actually two of them. And I was so surprised. At the beginning, I was very a little bit uncertain because faceworld.com is now, thousands of articles. And I was just thinking, how is that going to be relevant? What language do we translate to? My producer, who happens to, speak Spanish, originally from Argentina. And the moment we process the site using Weglot into Spanish, now we get Spanish brand deals out of all things. And we start to see different articles, different topics pop up in very different ways, like you said, compared to North America. And we're just learning so much from that experience. And exactly like you said, it's absolutely internationalization, things like that that you have to be aware of. It's no longer optional.
Yeah, and the topics that international audiences are interested in often
Mhm.
very different as well. Like what they want to relate to, what their immediate challenges are that they're facing, often very different than the things that you and I might think are the biggest ones as well. So, do you create custom content tailored more for international audience sometimes? Do you like jump between various problems that different groups face? How do you navigate that complexity?
Yeah, really interesting. I would say not yet, but it's customization based on international audience needs is something that I think we'll have to consider quite soon. Right now, we're letting it kind of surface organically. I am primarily writing content, for still, I would say for English speaking audience. However, because of my background that I am fluent in Mandarin Chinese, for instance, when I went back to China in 2017, I would just sit in there in the hotel room thinking, what if I can help American podcasters launch their podcast on Himalaya that is like 10 times the traffic of Apple Podcasts? It was just absolutely insane because of the population density. And I did that. It was so funny. I created a simple course. At the beginning, first 30 days, cricket. Nobody even talked about it. And all of a sudden, people start signing up. Even today, which the course is clearly outdated, people are still signing up. And I was getting a lot of consulting engagement. So I think part of that is let your natural instinct, letting who you are, your key differentiators kind of come through. You don't want to kind of target a market you kind of know nothing about. Whereas for me, I wanted to kind of be the, sort of the bridge or kind of fill the gap a little bit more. And it's really interesting. Like, for instance, I made a point to say, you know what, now I am a slightly more established content creators. I'm gonna give myself the permission to talk about what it's like to be a home-based creator, that I built my home around the work that I'm doing. So solar panels, why I think heat pumps are important. I installed a swimming pool and the kind of my way of exercising helps my mom, who I'm a caregiver for. Of course, this content is completely not relevant to everything else, yet that they are also driving traffic as well. And I think it's just fascinating for us to know that we have to branch out. We can't just hold like so tight to this is what we know, this is what's going to rank. It will drive yourself crazy, I think.
Exactly, because it often goes, even look at creative endeavors in general. One of the big things people
Mm,
say is like, how do you get out of a rut? How do you even know you're
yeah.
in a rut in the first place? Because once you get comfortable creating a certain kind of thing, you don't realize that the world has moved on, or there's enough sedimentary rock that's basically buried you by like, several layers, that you don't even realize it. You have your small audience, you have the echo chamber, the feedback loops are often not perfect. So you think you're still doing great things when you realize that, yep, the meteor hit, the dinosaurs are no longer here. You're still
Mhm.
writing for dinosaurs and targeting that, particular audience of creatures that, have now evolved to become mammals and fish and things like that. But getting to the translation part is interesting, because you talk about AI quite a bit. So you've probably seen all these examples of like people who are, let's say, famous world leaders, but in
Mhm.
real time it translates into a different language using their own voice and their inflections and how it works. And you're sitting there going like, wow, would how easy would it be for basically me to just upload a few clips of my audio, a few pictures of what I'm doing, and then having all these AI services pretty much make this entire conversation between you and I happen, because you and I have a backlog of content that the AI can train against. And so it doesn't
Mhm.
require us to actively be participating because we talk consistently about certain kind of topics and it knows our tone, it knows our style, and all these things. It is
Mhm.
very possible one day, maybe it's already happening right now, where we just tell an AI to like, pretend we're going to talk about how AI is going to impact business, and it generates a full interview with exact same facial expressions and style and all these things. And then I'm going to choose a drop down and say translate into these 20 languages as well. And it's like, no problem. And it translates it not just in an audio in a text-based format, but it actually gets the audio just right as well. Then you're like, upload to all these services worldwide, not just your usual ones of like Anchor/Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, but all
Yeah.
the services worldwide that it needs to be relevant into because of the languages they're available in. How far away are we from being able to pull that off?
Yeah, I think we still need some more time because a lot of the systems and apps that you did not mention, but I know you're thinking about, like 11 Labs for voice cloning. Not only, I mean, they're transformative. They've really figured out the intonation and all that, but still, I mean, I have tested on multiple clients. I've tested on multiple versions of my voice. It's still not quite there yet. They're leading the industry right now. And then I think about the facial recognition speaking portraits, so DID, which is an Israeli company that we have also partnered with as well. That there, it's magical. But I have also tested my image. Do I really want? There's so many subtlety to our eyes that it's, again, it's not quite there yet. I'm not someone who would use that. However, I do have clients who are super busy and who wouldn't otherwise have any time or interest in creating content. I would recommend this to them. So I think AI as a solution, it also depends on the project we're talking about, the creators themselves. I think it's going to be, I think we're moving at a really fast pace. I wouldn't be surprised by the end of the year, the different versions coming out is going to be even more realistic. But for now, when I work with clients on AI initiatives, it's never, and primarily they're what I call content based businesses or established creators. So the example you paint out is precisely the people I work with, that I focus on having a discovery call and conversation usually takes up about 60 to 90 minutes, and then pinpoint, like, is this something that you enjoy doing? They say, I love it. And there's no reason to take that away. But sometimes when it comes to content repurposing, getting the right clips, transcription, subtitle, share on social media, I almost never hear anybody enjoy doing that part. Well, let's see what we can automate from there. So it's, again, that's a very human process. There's a lot of empathy involved. I think for now, that's still the right approach.
This goes back to consistency, which is something that you brought
Mm-hmm.
up earlier on how do you create content. It used
Mm-hmm.
to be that you publish once a week, once every 2 weeks on the spot. It's great and it's going really well. Nowadays, you have content farms that create good enough content. It might not be great, but it's good enough where people are like, yeah, I can totally, go with this. If I'm getting it, 10 times a day, this particular information, as opposed to like one time a week from a person who's probably more authentic and more a subject matter expert in this area, that's okay. I'm willing to sacrifice the quantity over the
Mm-hmm.
quality, especially the quality is not like terrible, but it's good enough. How do you
Mm-hmm.
balance that out? Because I'll give you an example. I
Mm-hmm.
know I don't use TikTok a whole lot, but every now and then when I go look at that, I see like, I love historical things. So it's often like, historical battles and like things like that.
Mm-hmm.
90% of it's AI generated. The voices AI generated, the visuals are AI generated, and things like that. I'm like, I'm pretty sure this person or this group of people who are behind this probably crank out dozens, if not hundreds, of these videos a given day because they're not going out there creating the content. It's like looking at whatever AI chat service gives you for here's to give you a 10 paragraph summary of like famous battles in Greece, famous battles in Rome. They just copy and paste that into some service that adds the audio to it, adds little captions in the video, so you can actually see like the bubbly text that like that shows up here, and they're done. Whereas here I am like creating the slides, going and like making sure it's all perfect, and like is my code snippet working properly? And I'm like, why am I doing this? It's like at the end of the day, it's like if I can publish one video, get X number of views, or I can
Yeah.
publish 100 videos that each get X divided by 100, a smaller number, but the end result is still the same thing, but the amount of effort is like zero in one where it's like high effort in the other. How do you
Mhm.
balance those, two opposite worlds when the end result might be the same?
Yeah, that's such an interesting example. I think when you think about the audience of who consume your content versus the Greek myth or battles, right? The audience themselves they're very different. Somebody's looking at your code like who follow you. Accuracy probably does not just accuracy, the style of communication probably does matter quite a bit. Whereas I think the other part maybe is more entertainment, not one is education and the other is entertainment. And in the world we live in, there's edutainment, which is like the content that also wins. And I think you have to for me, for instance, like I think you have to balance the two again. If you don't, you kind of go crazy. Is number one, you got to cut yourself some slack of, I think I had to deliver 110%, give yourself the permission to do something at 80, 90%, like knowing what's good enough. That's really important. And if a mistake is ever made, I think again, like give yourself a break to know that you did your best, right? I think we've all been there to publish something like, oh, it wasn't like I made a mistake. There's a typo. Good news in the digital world that those can actually be corrected as long as your intention is good. I think I don't. I think I look at some of even the AI content on YouTube. It's just a voiceover, some images, and then it's very repetitive. It's like millions of views. I do feel that once again in my chest and in my gut, be like, what? Why am I doing this? This is such a waste of time. So, right? And then so I do. Same thing again. Like we're on this topic now. I would highly encourage you, like in addition to TikTok group, consider publishing your content on YouTube as shorts. Have you done that yet?
I've done a few, and it's
Okay.
just one of those things where coding stuff doesn't
Mm.
it totally works. I can absolutely make it work like that. It's just more of a time issue for me. It's like, okay, naturally everything's like widescreen and makes this work here, and I take care of it. I have to do extra work to make it fit in a smaller screen, whereas I'm like,
Yeah.
you know what? Forget this. I'm just going to talk about historical battles. Send the AI bot to it. It's going to create like square shape for like, for Instagram. It's going to create the widescreen for like, like longer videos. And then it's going to create the vertical one for TikTok. And I'm going to call it a day because you know
Yeah.
what? It's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna challenge you. Have a like be a little playful here. Is I too thought because consider like some of my earlier Zoom tutorials, for instance, it is clearly landscape. Okay, so like why do I have to do something extra to fit into a vertical screen? First of all, it doesn't even fit, right? Like you can't
Exactly.
like now you can see something over there, and as everything is all connected. So I'm gonna challenge you to try post some of the clips with black bars at the top, at the bottom, with just your little landscape or square screen in the middle. Try to publish that, of course, under 60 seconds on YouTube Shorts. Chances are you're going to see a significant increase in the number of views for shorts compared to your regular videos. It's very possible because for the entire past year, and actually even towards the end of 2022, YouTube has intentionally been sending so much organic traffic towards shorts in order to compete with TikTok. In fact, YouTube now, a platform that people would like prevent you from, people say podcasters, I don't respect you if you upload audio content on YouTube. That's just lame. You should never do that. Well, guess what? Today, thank goodness I didn't listen to any of those people. Some of my audio podcasts are on there. Actually, contributed to my channel being monetized early. That nowadays YouTube said 60%, 60% of the people who are listening or watching podcasts on YouTube are doing it for the first, like they're doing it for the first time. There are people who've never even consumed podcasts who are now doing so on YouTube. So I think we have to really rethink about the quality, the orientation. Sure, if you have time, a team to do it, fine. Otherwise, just upload it with black bars and see what happens.
All right, I will do this. I will absolutely do this. I've done a few, but I'm gonna, take your advice here and just take regular content and make that work. But no, the podcasting with YouTube is actually really interesting because before I just had a playlist. It was just regular playlist with like all the things I recorded here. I shared on, of course, on Anchor, which publishes like all these other podcast platforms, and I upload the video itself to YouTube as well. So Spotify and YouTube give you the video version. Everything else is the audio version. And then my
Very
YouTube was
smart.
like, "Oh, do you want to publish your podcast or like turn your existing channel to a podcast?" I'm like, "Oh, way ahead of you here. This playlist is exactly what you want to do." And hitting that box, I agree. It was actually very interesting that there's a recognition from like dismissing podcast and interview like content to being like, let's embrace it. Let's actually go after the big podcast players was actually pretty cool. Right side of history on that one for us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, since we're onto podcasts, one thing I really want to mention that people are still watching or listening to this at this point is repurposing long form content. So that includes like longer videos, even if it's solo or an interview show like this, to repurpose that into shorter content will absolutely help you, 3 times, 10 times the reach. It's just how the social media ecosystem is designed. That is true for YouTube Shorts, for TikTok, for Instagram, especially for LinkedIn. I think this type of content is something that people on LinkedIn are very interested in. So when you repurpose, you don't have to think about moving like Faye below Karupa, creating a vertical content because landscape works just fine on,
Yeah.
on LinkedIn, on Facebook. So, that's why I kind of, got into developing podintelligence.com with my partner, Adam, so that we're using, AI to automatically identify the keywords, the topics, the speakers, and giving you clips that you can use automatically. One more thing I'll mention is interesting that I initially were thinking like targeting right around 1 minute, but we noticed that YouTube, along with other platforms, are now favoring way shorter content. This blew my mind that their content, if you can pay attention to this, like pay attention on YouTube, 15 to 17 seconds, generally under 20 seconds worth of shorts are getting a lot of attention because YouTube is using its algorithm to say, oh, look, somebody watched 80% of the shorts. That's 15 seconds. It must be doing really well, as opposed to somebody watching 15 seconds of a 1 minute shorts. YouTube's like, well, I guess it's not all that engaging, is it? So it's like there's a psychological element, but I think as long as opposed to us aiming for whatever the requirement is, it's also important to explore other durations outside of the requirements.
Absolutely. And actually, you actually read a recent article on some of these AI kind of clipping that I think Riverside also provides as well. So I'm actually going to try it out for the first time after, with actually our recording here to see like how well that works and basically repurpose that. No, I agree with you. I think that's our
Yeah.
content has a longer life than we might often give it credit for, especially in snippets because people's attentions are not infinite, I it's read every study that, us going almost to the hour mark right now,
Mm-hmm.
90% of people are going to stop like, I'm not going to get to this point. Or maybe 99% are not get to this point. But one person who gets there, I'm like, they got value out of it. So great. Good for that one person, to do this. So I totally recognize and I agree. I think cutting the pieces of it that might be relevant for a certain audience for that particular moment in time, I think is a
Mm-hmm.
critical part of it. So one video can actually, it's kind of like, getting back like in analogies of like, when like a lion like, kills a gazelle or whatever, it's not just for one meal. It like goes for like a week basically, right? That's kind of like what it is. Like, yeah, it's like, a long form content, it's like a gazelle. And then,
Yeah.
it's a shame to only use it for like one meal. You can actually repurpose it in multiple different ways. So absolutely.
Yeah, let me know how you like Magic Cut. So that's a new feature from Riverside. It's still in beta and I've already tested out. So I definitely have some of my kind of, I was doing that in comparison to the work we're doing. So I would love to, I'll be so curious to hear your feedback on
All right,
how you
I
like
will give it a
it.
shot, and I
Yeah.
will absolutely let you know. And so, we're getting close to the end of the hour. I don't want to keep too much of you here, but I am always curious to know because you're a content creator. What is your tech setup like? I see, I'm sort of familiar with what you have here, but what camera do you use? What things do you try and not try? And you're like, I'm going to settle on this one. Curious to hear that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I can even move my camera around. So a lot of the question that comes up a lot is, first of all, the camera I'm using, it's nothing super fancy. It's a Logitech Brio webcam. It is a 4K cam, but still, I think it's just not quite the quality compared if I were to use my phone, using alongside with like Camo maybe, or I have a 4K camera. So I'm going to show you that's the camera. That's kind of my YouTube setup. And that is a Sony 6400 mirrorless camera. It's 4 years old and still works really well. My mic, it's on a boom arm, so I can move it around really easily without having to like move my table, shake my table as much. So this is a very special microphone. This is a Newman microphone. It's an investment, but it's something that I know I'm going to be using for so long. I have been for 10 years. This is a pop filter. So when I see you say things like the P's and T's, I won't blast into my mic. I really like this kind of wireless Logitech keyboard that I'm using. I try to be as ergonomic as I possibly can. I even got this new like ergo chair, which is all white. But in terms of lighting, I have two. So I have This is a Elgato, that's a key light, and I also have a Elgato ring light there. So it's just something that I can play with if I need to move things around. But it's pretty basic. Um, Anything else, Krupa, you want me to share my tech setup for my business, perhaps the software we use every day? It's up to you.
Whatever you think might be interesting. Yeah, because it's all like for me, my setup is essentially usually use my iPhone as we talked about earlier, but for whatever reason, it's not cooperating with me right now for these recordings. So I'm
Mhm.
currently on like a Logitech C925. I actually do have a Brio as well, but I'm like, oh, the iPhone's worked out really well, so I'm just gonna use that for all these things. So I'm on a slightly lower quality video setup right now. But yeah, what software do you typically use for your recordings and things like that?
Yeah, so I have a comprehensive list actually for my recording, for my podcasting, for YouTube, and for my small business on my website at phaseworld.com/tools, or it's on the website in the center. It's called the Small Business Toolkit. In terms of recording, I love using Riverside. There's an alternative. I always need to have a plan B for this type of stuff. The other one I really love using is called Podcastle. So Podcastle has a 4K video recording. Prior to we had these tools, I used Zencaster, which is still very solid. We even had to use Zoom for people who are super busy and just don't want to learn a second or third tool. So for in terms of editing, I have basically eliminated editing. These days, I live stream every single piece of content using Restream. And if you're looking for a cheaper option, OneStream.live is really helpful. It's $10 as opposed to 19 for the same tier of service. And I don't really edit much anymore. And for our email marketing, I use Brevo, Brevo. Is it Brevo? Brevo. It's very previously Send and Blue. They're really quite powerful, and our website runs on WordPress. It was previously on Squarespace for many years. Making that transition was well worth it. So I guess I will not bore you with the rest of the details, but I have a whole tech stack like created as a blog post on phaseworld.com for anybody
No,
interested.
absolutely. I'll definitely check that out. And so I think this is the technical side of you also coming in. So the computer science degree and all these things kind of, indirectly plays a role in like just giving you this willingness to be like, this definitely, I get it. I know exactly why it's important. So I think the technical background definitely shows here in your description of like going from Squarespace to WordPress, for example. Not a trivial thing, as people have tried.
Yeah. It's so fun to talk about this. I can nerd out all day long. It's so fun.
Yep. Well, Faye, yeah, I think you and I can talk forever on this one, but is there anything else you'd like to, discuss before we, wrap it up for a bit?
Oh, I really appreciate it. I appreciate finally meeting you after 20 years. And please let me know, Krupa, anything I can contribute to what you're doing, what your audience is looking for. Feel free to send me an email, phaseworld@gmail.com. That's my personal email. So anything I can help question, help answer and help question as well. And just let me know. I'm open book and here to help creators and content-based businesses.
Well, Faye, this is a blast. Thanks again,
Mhm.
and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.